Hi, this is Darren with SimNation. Just doing a quick season preview video for the WWPF, who of course will start their season tonight. Um, and the defending champion is Invisible Witness, who won with Carolina last year, beating the Steelers in the championship game. So season prediction wise, have up in front of you what the CPU thinks. I'll give you my quick thought and then I'm gonna give you my own thoughts about what this looks like. This will be a relatively fast video, by the way. So in the NFC North, the CPU believes that the Chicago Bills will win that, with Minnesota coming in second. The CPU is on crack. There's no way the Chicago Bills is going to win that. It's going to be between Minnesota, Detroit, and Green Bay. Really, probably Minnesota and Green Bay. Minnesota, of course, is Rick. Green Bay is DWK. And then, if I remember correctly, Detroit is under Brian. So Brian didn't have as good of a year last year as I think he wanted to, but I think that he's done well in the draft and other free agency. So I do look for him to bounce back. NFC South, as much as everybody's going to hate me for saying this, the CPU is right. It's Carolina's to lose. Um, and honestly, I don't really see them losing that. I think that there's not a strong contender in the NFC South for them. So I look for them to repeat relatively easy. Atlanta could potentially be a playoff team. I doubt that though. New Orleans, I think, is probably going to be the one that is more in line with being a playoff team. NFC East, again, this is Templars to lose. He's done a very good job over the last few seasons with winning it. I do think that we saw the rise of the New York Giants last year with Cable, with Witten as the quarterback. Plus, you got Skelter, who has turned it around at Philadelphia, and I do expect a really good season out of him. And you have Udo at Washington. So, of all the divisions, this one's probably going to be the most wide open. But I think in the end, I think Templar is going to edge them all out. But this one could be interesting because I think all four teams are going to be in play for the playoffs. Out in the West, I do agree with Stewart winning the West with San Francisco, although I think he's going to have his hands full with Seattle because Seattle had a really, really good offseason. Spoof did a good job of putting together a pretty strong team there, and I think that's going to show. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. AFC North, I do agree. I think this is Pittsburgh's to lose, not just because I have Pittsburgh as my team, but Pittsburgh still has quite a bit of a gap between them and Baltimore. I do expect Baltimore to make the playoffs this year and for Kevin to really push hard up against the Steelers to make it harder for them just to win the division. In one or two injuries, and it could easily go to Baltimore. I think the in the power rankings I saw, the CPU thinks that Cleveland will finish last, which is Bio Eagle. I disagree with that. I think Bio is going to be right in the mix of it for the division. Cincinnati definitely will finish last. In the South, I don't know. I agree with this one actually. Rick is a great coach at Indianapolis. Tennessee, if I remember correctly, is uh, Bama, and then I think you have Starfinder, who is at Jacksonville, and you have JP at Houston. So this one's kind of like the NFC East. All four of these coaches can win this division. Starfinder, of course, has Jacksonville on a pretty good path. I think Tennessee's on a very good path, and I think Indianapolis is as well. And with Houston, it's always kind of a wait and see. They haven't done as well as I thought that they would. But if you had to ask me to pick one today, Tennessee probably is the one that wins this, with at least two of those teams competitive for a playoff spot. The East is going to be the East like it is every year. It's going to be a battle between Shark and DP. Shark at New England and DP, of course, at the Jets. Soa had a good draft. Soa had a good off season, but that has yet to translate into him actually making the playoffs. So I don't see Soa finishing second. It's really going to be between New England and New York, and of course we get to see that in week one because they're playing each other. So we'll get a good advance idea. It's too close to call, and I realize I'm punting, but it's hard to pick between those two because they alternate the years in which they do it. The Jets did lose a couple people, so did the Patriots, but I think at the end of the day, they both had really good off seasons and made up ground. The West is relatively straightforward. It's going to be Peter again with Oakland. He has pretty much a death grip on that whole division. Um, Denver will likely finish second. I don't think San Diego will. Now, if San Diego gets a human in there, I think that changes a little bit. So those are my general thoughts. What's driving those thoughts? Uh, we'll just go through the ones I think that are contenders for winning the division as well as the playoffs. And the game has an actual decent functionality for this. So let's talk about Green Bay first, and then we'll go into Minnesota. But with Green Bay, as you can see, is they lost Seaton. That's a pretty big loss for them. Seaton was one of the best rushers overall. This may not give me what I want, by the way, but um, I think that they have a lot of good things going for them. I think the thing that's still going to hurt Green Bay, unfortunately, is the quarterback play. They have a great rushing attack. Watson is a really good running back, and has had a really good thing. They have a pretty decent defense too. But I think just in general, when you match them up against the Vikings, I don't think that they have the firepower to be able to match up well. Rick has Colwell coming back, who was one of the top passers last year. He arguably has some of the best running backs in that division with Taft and Enos. And then, of course, you still have at wide receiver. Um, you have Raymond Sutton, who just last year was really, really good. Daniel Orr should be pretty good as well. I think the big thing around Rick is his defense. His defense hasn't really stepped up as much as he'd want it to. He's a little weak at linebacker, especially when it comes to speed. And I think that that could hurt him in the long run. But I think the offense is more than capable of winning the division. And I think that's how he's going to win it, actually, is through the division. Now, the big wild card here, of course, is Brian at Detroit. He's got Tennant as a quarterback, which is a really good addition. He's got a good running back in Hammett. And generally speaking, I think the offense is going to do pretty well. Allard was one of the best wide receivers last year. But I think his defense is actually better than Minnesota's. But I think the challenge is Minnesota has so much offensive weapons that I just don't think he's going to be able to overcome that, unfortunately. And then we talked about this. I'm not going to go too deep into the South because, candidly, I mean, it's going to begin and end with Invisible at Carolina. Mario at Tampa Bay may be able to sneak in there and get something from him, but I generally don't see it. Just if you look at the roster, they got better as the offseason went on. Yeah, they lost a couple people, but they replaced them pretty well in most cases. Zelensky is back, and he's just a phenomenal quarterback. The line is pretty strong. Now, he's going to have to cut some people because he's over cap, and he's definitely over position. But he's got a lot of strong choices he can make. So I don't see anything changing with Invisible winning this division. Invisible also probably being the top team in the NFC from a potential making it to the championship. I mean, he won last year. He was in the championship game the year before, and I don't see any of that changing. Tampa Bay again. Mario's got a young team. I give it a year or two, and Mario's competing with Invisible. But I just don't think it's this year. I could be wrong. Burt could prove me wrong. Burt is actually a pretty good rookie to pick up from Tampa Bay. And if he can find a running game and if his defense can really start to shine, I think he could. But the challenge I worry about with Mario is I don't think the defense is there, and he's going to have a hard time matching up against the speed that Invisible has. We talked about the East. The East is probably the most wide open of all the divisions outside of the AFC South. Um, Templar is one of those guys, he lets go almost his entire roster every season and then replenishes them, and he does a really good job in replenishing them. I think the biggest challenge for Templar this season is going to be, is his offense good enough to keep up with the Giants and to keep up with the Eagles? Temp Skelto changed up his philosophy a little bit in the offseason, and is probably going to try to throw the ball a little bit more, and that could mean some problems for this defense because, as you can see, the defense has some speed issues. If you can get speed against his corners, you're going to generally win that. He doesn't have fast linebackers, um, and his free safeties are probably a strength. So if I'm in the East, I'm throwing the ball a lot at Dallas, and that could be the recipe that most of them have for winning that division. New York, I like everything that Cable has been doing the last 2 seasons. He's only getting stronger. Of course, he has Witten, which makes it really easy for him. But last year we saw the emergence of Hammett as a running back, and also Felton. And I think that he's only getting stronger based on the way that he is filling out the different positions that he needs. He's got good wide receivers finally for Witten, which will hopefully cut down on Witten's interceptions because he threw quite a bit. I think the biggest issue that he's still got to worry about is the same issue as the others. He's really susceptible to running, strong running attacks with New York. He's got a better secondary, but against the elite pass attacks in the league, he's going to struggle. Um, Probably one of the teams I want to keep an eye on is Skelto with Philadelphia. Skelto's always done the run first. I like running my fullbacks and all that jazz. And the thing with that philosophy is it doesn't really translate well in this league. So if he can throw the ball, he's got all the ability to win the division easily and actually make a very deep run in the playoffs and potentially challenge Invisible. This is one of the few teams in the NFC I think that can challenge Invisible. Um, but the thing is, he's got to get away from that running attack, which just makes him single faceted and makes it easy for people just to shut him down. He's got some pieces. I'm high on Miller. I know a lot of people aren't, but from a medium passing game, Miller is probably a really good quarterback to have. And then the last one is Washington. Udo's a little bit of an unknown. He took out last season off, but I think Udo is another one of those guys who's got the pieces. It's just a matter of pushing him out. He doesn't match up well on offense against a lot of the teams, but his defense is really solid. So I think Washington has the ability, if they can generate a good rushing attack, to kind of mirror what Pittsburgh does in the AFC. Um, in the West, I'm only going to cover two teams because it's really a two-team race. I know LA's out there, and Bama is. I'll probably touch on Bama because Bama has the potential to be a wild card. It starts with San Francisco. San Francisco, Stewart has a really good team. He continues to replenish. He's got arguably the best rookie running back in Ford, who had a massive season, who's already challenging Lackey for the best running back. He's got a solid defense. All in all, they'll sort of not creating the right matchups, getting the play calling wrong. San Francisco should go deep this year. They should at least make it. They should be in the running for one of the top two seeds, and then they should make it to the championship game. They're one of the teams I think that can actually beat Invisible because he's got all the right pieces for it. Seattle last year struggled, didn't do all that well. Spoof had a really good draft, and he's really turning it around in Seattle. So I do think that we're going to see them do pretty well this year. He did quite a few things in the offseason just to make them better. So I do think that he's got a good chance of making a run and making some noise where nobody may be looking at him. And he's got a very good defense as well. The problem with his defense is they're slow. So, and I think that's the differentiation between him and Stewart, and the reason why Stewart's ultimately going to win this division. The Rams, again, this is Bama, if I remember correctly. The Rams have a good team as well. Bama's done a good job of replenishing them. The challenge is they just don't have the horses to compete with San Francisco just yet. Give it a season or two, and I think that changes. He's got him on a good trajectory, a good plan. As you can see, his secondary's gotten faster. Still maybe not fast enough. Uh, Linebacker wise, he's got good pieces at linebacker, but again, the speed's not there. Same with the line. He's about a season or two away from actually starting to make noise. So in the West, it's really Seattle versus San Francisco, with San Francisco kind of winning out. When we look at the NFC, I think the key here is I think Minnesota wins the North. I think easily Carolina wins the South. I'm going to go with Philadelphia in the East. I know I said Dallas at the beginning, but I'm changing my mind. San Francisco on the West, and then I think that Dallas and really Dallas and probably Seattle, Dallas, Seattle, New York, Washington, Tampa Bay, and Green Bay and Detroit all fighting for those two last spots into the playoffs. When we talk about the NFC North, again, I think this is Pittsburgh's to lose. Pittsburgh, the only thing that Pittsburgh has a problem going into the season with is that quarterback. Though, if it's possible, the defense got nastier than it was last year. Through the combination of Burke, Spite, and a couple other free agents that came in, most specifically Pacheco, who replaces, of course, um, some of the retired defensive ends. So I still like Pittsburgh. I think that they are the best team hands down. I do think that Kevin is pushing hard with Baltimore, and Baltimore's entering the picture more and more. I'm curious to see what he's going to do with Long. Long has the same arm strength as Witten and could really be a game changer for them. And I think as you look at his defense, he got stronger on the defensive side of the ball. And that was pretty important for him because he'll be able to compete with the Jets and compete with others as well. He already had a good defensive line to begin with. The linebackers are good, but I think if Pantoja doesn't get healthy, that's going to hurt him. Because again, his linebacker core is good, but Pantoja is a very key part of that. Um, I think everybody's looking past Cleveland. I think that's a mistake. Sparks has turned out to be one of the best quarterbacks from the draft that Witten was in, minus Witten, of course. And he's got all the right pieces. He always has had a good running game, and his running game is something you got to pay attention to. But I think the challenge that he's had has been on the defensive side of the ball, where he doesn't match up well against the speedsters that are in the AFC, and also his line is a little undersized. I'm not talking about Cincinnati because Cincinnati's not really going to make much noise this year. Now, if they get a human in there, I think that's different. Indianapolis, I still really like Indianapolis a lot. I think the biggest thing for Indianapolis is going to be on the defensive side of the ball with how do they really start using those cornerbacks that they have that are really fast. The linebacking core is really solid, but it doesn't have the depth you'd want to see for them to have a sustained run. I mean, they only have three linebackers. That's going to be a problem. Defensive tackle, again, they don't have the great speed, strength rush. And really, this was a problem for them last year. It's going to be a problem again this year, is they don't have the depth on the defense to really hold a sustained campaign. Jacksonville, again, Jacksonville had a pretty good draft. They also had a good offseason. They already had some really good pieces in play. Their offense is pretty solid. Their defense is pretty weak. They do have some good people on defense, but large, uh, I don't think that they're quite ready. The linebacking core is actually one of the best in the AFC, but when you get to the defensive line, I think that they're going to struggle a little bit there. Even though they've done a really good job over the last few seasons in making it much better. Um, but their defensive tackles, they're just not there. And of course, they do have some good safeties, but I think one of the things that will make Jacksonville stay in the game is they do have depth, they do have a good offense. Their defense is good, but if someone knows how to get around that defense, they're going to have a field day with them. Tennessee, I like Tennessee a lot. I think Tennessee is one of those teams that has the potential to be quite good. Now, the key here, though, for Tennessee is if anything happens uh, to Ben, or if they're deciding to play a longer passing game, or to Hall if they're deciding to play a smaller passing game, they may have some issues. They actually need to run a shorter passing game and make sure they use Hall and Hestel. But they still do have Richmond, who is one of the better quarterbacks, again, for short passing. They got good running backs. They have a good offensive line. They've got good wide receivers. Um, their defense, I worry about the depth at defense. They've got depth at linebacker, but again, they're slow. Defensive tackle, it's pretty solid, and their defensive backfield is pretty solid. It's so again, if a team can shut down the short passing game, they can shut down Tennessee's offense. But Tennessee's got a pretty good defense too. So, and then of course Houston's biggest problem has just been the playbook. They throw the ball long a lot, and granted they have the wide receivers to do it, but anytime you lock on long ball as your main option, you're going to struggle a little bit with that because teams are just going to lock onto that and start blocking it. They have a decent defense. As you can see, they've got speed, but again, depth is going to be an issue. Um, and they've got good defensive ends. If they can deal with the depth issue, move away from that long ball strategy they have, I think Houston contends. We talked about this before. Miami, Soa does a good job of putting together teams. I just haven't seen Soa take the next step and actually be able to get those teams to produce. Shaw is one of the better quarterbacks in the league from a rookie perspective, um, but I don't think that he's demonstrated he can stay healthy yet. And I think the other problem of it is that a lot of times there's a little bit of discord in the game planning for Soa, which translates onto the field where they just don't play as well as the team is. As you can see, he doesn't have the speed in the secondary to compete with New England and with New York, which is going to hurt him. He's got good linebackers. His line is pretty solid. His safeties are not. Again, when you're in a division with New York and New England, you're going to have speed, and that's where they're just going to eat away at him. Uh, Shark made a big run last year. I think he made it, if I remember correctly, to the AFC Championship before they lost to Pittsburgh. Um, and there's no reason why he can't make that run again this year. He's got all the right pieces back. And I like what they have. But of course, the biggest challenge for him is he has to win those games against DP and the New York Jets. And DP's probably playing with a chip on his shoulder after last season, where he didn't win the division. What I worry about with Shark is his defensive line. I think his secondary, his linebacking core is really good, but if New York starts running the ball on him, or he goes up against Pittsburgh or Oakland, who have very strong running attacks, that could hurt him. We talked about this before. The Jets are probably the pre-ultimate passing attack in the league. Spriggs is one of the best out there. Bryant is a much better running back than he gets credit for, mostly because most of the focus is always on the wide receiver. I worry about the depth that DP has with wide receiver. He only has 4 wide receivers. If one of them goes down, he's in trouble. He's got the speed in the secondary to be able to deal with most teams. The faster teams, though, may give him a little bit of a problem. He's got great linebackers. I don't like his defensive line. I like his ends, but his inside is weak and susceptible, which is traditionally how I beat him with Pittsburgh. So I think the Jets definitely are probably going to finish second to New England. That Sharks probably asking me not to do that because I'm giving DP a chip. to play with. Oakland, Oakland's problems the last two seasons has been at quarterback. Um, they just don't have one. So when you think about it, Reynolds 41, Giordano's 35. DeLeon is a good dual threat quarterback, but Peter has yet to find a quarterback that he can actually replace Reynolds with. Now, if it was me, I'd just say just ride Reynolds until he retires. He's a really good thing. He does have really good running backs, and people are going to have to watch this with Easterling and Leonard. They both are very, very good. He's got good wide receivers. He's got a good line. His defense is, it's going to be hard to pass on Peter. You're better off trying to run on him. But again, you got to bear in mind that he does know how to game plan. So that's one of the reasons why I like Oakland a lot to win this division. I also like Oakland to make a very deep run into the playoffs. But we'll talk about that. Denver still has Lavelle. Lavelle's a really good quarterback. Thomas could become one. They got Grill, who's one of the better running backs in the league. They have good wide receivers. They have a good line. What kills Denver every season is their defense or their lack thereof. They don't have the speed to compete with most of the big boys in either the linebacker or the cornerback core. The line is solid but not great, so that's going to hold them back. So if we look at the AFC, uh, my choices is Pittsburgh's probably winning the North. I like Tennessee to win the South. I think New England's going to win the East. I think Oakland easily is going to win the West. I think Pittsburgh, Oakland, New England, New York are going to be fighting for the 1 and 2 seeds. I think the wild card teams are going to be, who's going to be fighting for wild cards is Baltimore, Cleveland, Jacksonville, Indianapolis, New York. Actually, I think New York will be the wild card. The other teams will be fighting for that last wild card spot. Um, and then I think that Denver will be in there. I think if we think about the NFC, I think really the NFC Championship is going to be likely between Carolina and San Francisco, with Carolina winning it. And then I think the AFC is likely going to be Oakland and New England because I think Pittsburgh just doesn't have the doubts at quarterback is going to keep Pittsburgh from making the championship game for the third straight year. So I like it to be New England versus Oakland, and I think Oakland wins that, and it's going to be Oakland versus Carolina, which that's an interesting matchup. We'll see Invisible versus Peter, and I think Peter actually wins that and gets back there. The wild cards for me will be Minnesota, Philadelphia, who could get themselves in there, and then on this side it will definitely be New York, and Tennessee could make a sustained run as well, and then just keep an eye on Baltimore with Kevin because Kevin is a pretty good coach, and he's really been restoring that team back to what it was. So I think he's due for a playoff appearance this year. Player of the year, keep an eye on Witten. He's just been phenomenal. We'll see probably a running back come up this year. There was a running back taken that I think is very, very good at what he does. So we'll see how that plays out. But I think that's it for now. It'll be interesting to see how all this works itself out. I think from a defensive perspective, defensive rookie of the year, keep an eye on Dominique Burke out of Pittsburgh and Leon Ashbury. I think they were two of the shocks in the draft. I do think it'll be interesting to see what happens with Kyle Hall as well as James Long. Those are two guys who I think that should have went much higher than they did, and they may really play well. Plus, there was a couple running backs just to keep an eye on that could be the latest iteration of Lackey and Ford, who were two running backs who ran for 2,000 yards as a rookie. So that's it for now. If you're interested in joining us, I'll have the link in the video, but definitely would love to have you. The league starts tonight, and then we'll see how that goes. So everyone, thank you for your time.